When a cleanup crew went through the confines of Benton Central High School, they found a McDonald's cup from the 60s. Not super interesting, right? Wrong. Scientists took a closer look inside this cup, and what they would find would change how people see both the limits of physics and biology, and also make people question what was inside of those old McDonald's cups. The scientists first discovered that the cup had its own damn atmosphere separate from Earth's. The cup's atmosphere is very similar to Earth's, though, being made up of 77% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, 1.1% helium, 0.7% argon, and 0.2% other gases like carbon dioxide, neon, etc. The ground here, quote-unquote, is very different from Earth's, and without a very easy way to map this place out due to it being inside of a friggin' cup, this was the best we could do. The ground is roughly made up of 50.3% glucose and 22.9% fructose, which is 73.2% sugar. The sugar here acts like the sort of rock of this place. 19.7% dust, being made of dirt, hair, skin, etc., making up the sort of soil of this place. And 7.1% rust coming from the box the cup was hiding behind. On top of and under the sugar, there are many pools of soda. These pools act as the cup's stand-in for water, and since due to the cup's location, there is no rain and only occasionally humid gusts of wind. Our first animal will be Trandifer, one of the more generalist species. A great starting point thanks to Trandifer sharing many of the common traits from inside the cup. Trandifer is actually blind, a surprisingly common trait amongst animals inside the cup. It instead uses modified pedipalps that help it smell, and give Trandifer a poor sense of hearing. Trandifer, like all other organisms in the cup, is microscopic and can seemingly float against the forces of gravity with its arms, which even have a patagium to give it more surface area to help it float. But of course, it can only float to a certain degree. Trandifer gets its name from the bizarre almost third arm that it shares amongst many Trandifer relatives. This arm is used to grab onto objects and plants to have an easier foothold in its environment. But what does Trandifer eat? Well, moving on to the cup's dominant ground vegetation, Folium. Folium is a small plant, even by this ecosystem's standards. Foliums are 5-leaved plants that basically act like grass. One question you may be asking is, why is it orange and not green like most other plants we know of? Well, this is a common trait amongst plants in the ecosystem. Some plants still use chlorophyll, but most plants in this cup use something called photogears, which basically are just orange chlorophyll that interlock with each other. Their orange color either comes from the rust inside the cup, or some other reason that we don't know of. But now it's time for Trandifer to be eaten by Caeca chaser. Chaser is a relative of Trandifer, but has some fundamental differences, like having only one pedipalp, which will just be called gray sensors from now on, to not get confused later. Instead of the arm-like spine that Trandifer has, it has 3 hooked or clawed tail for grabbing onto prey. They have hammer-like jaws that crush into anything in their way, and Caeca's jaws are so adapted to crushing live prey that Caeca can't chew their food with them, instead using claw-like adaptations in their mouth to pull bits of meat as Caeca simply holds the prey in place. Caeca's gray sensor is much better at smelling than its relatives, and if Caeca's prey manages to escape its grasp, it will chase them into death, giving Caeca its name. But how about something to get rid of corpses? Well, meet Natantus. Natantus is one of the most simple creatures in the cup. They have no eyes, mouths, ears, or gray sensors. They can only feel their environment, which they will endlessly search until they find a corpse. Then Natantus will use stingers on the end of its arms to inject a liquefying substance in and on the corpse. Then it will draw in the blood and flesh goo that Natantus has made, often leaving behind a large portion of the corpse. But Natantus is not the simplest animal in the cup. That title is taken by Pecus pfister and its other relatives. This whole genus has a very simple lifestyle, acting as filter feeders, in which our world are usually found underwater, but this place, with its large amount of dust being made up primarily of skin and hair, can support filter feeders. Although the relatives of Pecus pfister have very similar lifestyles, they have some key differences other than color and size. While Pecos Pfister only uses its arms to brush more dust over it and moves slightly faster, Rubinus Pfister have some arms that they use to help defend themselves, but rarely have to since they have a hard outer shell and size on their side. But small Amethysta Pfister uses its arms mostly for movement and to swarm predators. And Gigans Pfister has a weaker outer shell, but is the largest out of them all, and even has a distinct smell to thwart off predators. The way these animals filter through the dust is by basically inhaling the dust into small holes on the surface of the shell and moving them into the stomach, and anything unwanted inside the dust, like hairs, rocks, etc., will get ejected back out of these holes. But how about some more plants, shall we? On to Triplex Cowl. An interesting thing about Triplex Cowl is that it uses both photogears and chlorophyll, something only a few plants do. And Triplex Cowl also uses sexual reproduction instead of asexual reproduction like Folium, meaning that Triplex Cowl has male and female parts, being the other two stems that it has. The hairs on the male stem on a semi-monthly basis release spores that hopefully the wind will carry to another Triplex's female stem, to later be turned into a fully developed spore and then will be released again to hopefully land in an optimal growing position. A close relative of Triplex Cowl is Microlignum, one of the tallest plants in the ecosystem. It spouts a tall stem and two branching heads holding a few leaves. Microlignum is one of the first plants to use the excessive abundance of helium in the atmosphere. At many points in the plant's life, it will lose its leaves and leave behind many holes, and out of these holes will sprout many spores using helium pockets to help float even longer distances. Another tree-like plant in the cup is Lapis Folium. Lapis Folium has many bizarre traits to go with its name, most predominant of which being the stone-like leaves on top of the plant. The plant lives in a slightly hotter and drier location compared to other plants. These leaves help to catch the water that transpirates out of the plant and drip it back to the ground for the second interesting adaptation. The massive roots to help extract water that is deeper in the ground and also can gather water from a wider area. Another bizarre adaptation is the very droopy leaves. These actually go against holding water and actually lose water faster than if the plant had stiff leaves. The working theory is that the plant is evolving away its leaves to become more cactus-like. But away from the plants, let's talk about Praestrictus. Praestrictus is the closest living relative to Natantus. Praestrictus, even without sight or smell, is a predator. To sense its environment, it uses hair-like organs to sense rapid changes in temperature at great distances. This allows Praestrictus to sense whether an animal is nearby or not, and if so, it uses, instead of the stingers Natantus has, Praestrictus uses two mouths with many sharp teeth, and the stingers left behind by Natantus are now used to deliver minor toxins that congeal blood in small amounts, slowing down animals and making it harder for them to run away. Praestrictus's mouth also has a tongue with many spines on it to help remove flesh stuck on bones. Thanks to Praestrictus's lack of any efficient way to hunt prey and sense its environment, it gets very few chances to actually eat, and it and Natantus are steadily decreasing in population. Up next is Pentanulida. Pentanulida is a scavenger and uses its arms to sort of smell for corpses. After finding a corpse, they will slowly, for multiple days, continue to eat the corpse and defend the corpse from any other scavengers. In fact, they are so aggressive only when defending corpses that Natantus's populations are swiftly dwindling thanks to Pentanulida's hoarding of corpses. But any time that Pentanulida is not defending a corpse, they are usually perfectly calm and don't attack anything unless provoked. But when it comes in contact with a predator, with its large arms it will release small pods packed with protein and have a very distinct and strong smell to them. These distract the predator as Pentanulida makes its escape. Next on the list is Lata otis. Lata otis is an omnivorous animal. Most of its diet is simply small ground plants like Triplex Cowl. Lata otis is also the first creature on the list that has proper eyes. Although simple and only being able to see orange and yellow, it allows the creature to avoid predators and search for preferred food. On its arms are the hairs that are able to pick up small amounts of sound waves, giving it, although not great hearing, better hearing than Trandifer or Caica Chaser. As for the animals Lata otis eats, it only eats the old and dying animals that are about 50 to 70% of otis's size, or if there's something that can pose a threat, Lata otis will not attack them. Topic of Ladeotis, let's talk about Sessulto parasiti. This is the first parasite on our list and one of the only parasites in the cup. This parasite only uses Ladeotis and uses its tiny arms to catch the scent of an otis. And when otis comes close enough to the parasite will jump onto otis and, similar to lampreys or cookie cutter sharks, will eat a hole into otis with its large teeth and drink the blood. But when otis finds a mate or comes close enough to another otis for a long period of time, if Sessulto senses another one of its kind, they will both jump off their hosts. Merely an hour after mating, any extra blood the female has will be transferred to the male, and the female, after laying its eggs, will leave and later soon die. The male, with as much energy as he can muster, will defend the eggs until he dies, and after 2 days the eggs will hatch and eat the corpse of their father.
Next up is Rara radiolus stella. This is a much simpler parasite, but with a very similar lifestyle. First things first, this parasite is surprisingly rare for how efficient it is, but they are spreading. The parasite for its entire life will be attached to lapis folium, microlignum, or some other tall plant. After 7 to 12 days, it will poke a hole through the plant and both absorb juices from the plant and release a chemical inside of the plant that prevents other radioluses from growing on the plant. This prevents too many radioluses from attaching and draining a plant of juices, both killing the plant and the radioluses. When it comes to mating, the animal's shell will fuse into one hard, airtight plate, and inside the animal, an extreme amount of gametes will be produced. And after some time, there will be so much pressure inside the radiolus that will explode in a cloud of gametes and die, and fall off the plant and let the plant heal.
Time for a rather unremarkable plant, being Segumd caul. Segumd caul is one of the most well-adapted plants for arid environments, and has nothing to really talk about other than the mildly interesting fact that the leaves of the plant are not only very small, but also have less photogears than the stem. This is because the leaves increase the plant's surface area, which means more transpiration, where water evaporating from the plants can occur faster and stronger. And living in a place with the least amount of water and or soda, that's a big problem. So the plant is evolving away its leaves to become more cactus-like. A much more interesting plant than Segumd caul is Callium muscus. As a small young muscus, it's not very remarkable, but after about 6 to 7 months, the plant will grow its roots around the boulder of sugar under the plant, and using the excessive amount of helium in the atmosphere, muscus will fill a membrane in the plant with said helium, but this is not enough to lift the plant and the boulder, so after the membrane fills with helium, a chemical reaction occurs causing the plant to heat up about 12 times hotter inside of the membrane, causing the plant to float above the ground. This makes sure of 3 things. 1. That the plant has zero competition from other plants. 2. That the plant does not have to worry about being eaten by herbivores or parasitized by radioluses. 3. That the plant gets to spread its spores on a much larger area.
The closest living relative but dying relative of Callium muscus is Alsone mortua. This plant, unlike their muscus sibling, spends most of their life on the ground, and until the plant grows its seeds around its base, it will go through the same process as muscus: inflation with helium, chemical heating, then floating. But unlike muscus, only about 7 to 9 minutes after the plant leaves the ground, the plant will die. Then about 10 to 20 minutes after the plant dies, the seeds will start to fall out. Although this seems like a great strategy to spread your seeds and continue the species, Mortua's population has decreased rapidly due to the fact that about half the seeds will die along with the plant, and most of the other seeds will die on impact with the ground, and any seeds that get to adulthood often die due to radiolus.
But now time for the rarest animal in the cut, being Hyalus oculi. Not much is known about this animal since only 5 have been discovered in the 4 years of researching we have done. Hyalus is an herbivore that only seems to eat Mortua and muscus. The animal also has great vision in comparison to other animals we have talked about. The most likely reason this animal is so rare is that it has no means of self-defense. The many arms that the animal has are only for movement and are far too weak to defend themselves with. Also, thanks to its body form, it is very slow and unable to run or float from a predator. And that is about all that's known about this interesting animal. Onto a much more common animal, being Multus chele. Most people that studied this animal say it's unnerving, with its giant mouth with an uncanny resemblance to a human mouth. But this animal is purely herbivorous. The animal uses its many claws to pluck off leaves and rip pieces of plant off. With its green coloration, it is able to camouflage in the environment and hide from predators, which Multus seems to prefer to do rather than fighting predators.
Next is the final addition to these three relatives, being Arcus cellula. Arcus is a small filter feeder-like animal, simply absorbing dust through its skin. Arcus is a toxic and aggressive creature. If only it seems Moltus and possibly Hyalus don't get attacked. Everything else will get threatened and cut with the creature's large hooked arms. The arms on the side sense rapid changes in temperature. These animals, however, with their aggression, gets themselves killed by other herbivores simply protecting themselves. This is causing their populations to steadily decrease. Although Arcus does not do very well against herbivores, they do excellent against carnivores. They have a poison in small pockets of their skin, and when that poison is ingested, it causes stomach pain and minor sluggishness to the predator. They have evolved bright colors to help predators distinguish Arcus from other creatures like Moltus. But a small problem with that is that many carnivores are blind, so that to combat this, Arcus uses its small arms on the side to produce a pheromone with a very distinct smell, allowing the blind to recognize Arcus. On to more plants with Viridis grani. Being the closest living relative of Folium, Viridis is likely the fastest growing plant in the cup other than Folium. And here, sometimes Viridis will even outcompete its Folium brother. This is thanks to the far-spreading and fast-growing seeds. These seeds are very light and can be carried by the wind easily. These seeds have small bristles to temporarily attach to animals, most noteworthy of which being Praestrictus and Atantus. Both of these have rough skin, making it easy for the seeds to attach. But even without these, Viridis does very nice on its own. Next is Prustrum herbum. Prustrum is another close relative of Folium. It's the first plant to have defenses against other plants and animals. On top of this plant, it uses sharp spines that are covered partially with rust, this being one of the only plants in the cup to take advantage of the extreme amount of rust. These spines easily cut through the soft inner lining of animals' mouths and deters animals from eating it, and with its recognizable head shape and height, some animals can see not to eat it. The blind, though, have to learn the hard way. On the bottom of Prustrum has wide roots covering a small area around the plant. This prevents other plants from taking hold near the plant, and in some cases, when too many Prustrums take hold in one area, they can entirely replace all plants but Folium. The next plant is Aqua Caulis. Caulis, overall, compared to the other two plants we just talked about, is unremarkable, other than the fact that Aqua Caulis will store water and or soda inside of its stem for when there is excessively less water, allowing it to survive where others couldn't. The next animal is Longa auris. Auris is one of the more advanced creatures in the cup, and as you can tell is one of the many relatives of Trandifer. Auris is best known for their extremely long gray sensors used by Trandifer to grab food mostly. Auris has excelled their ability to catch sound waves and has some of the best hearing in the cup, allowing it to hear danger before they have to see it. Auris's diet is mostly consisted of Viridis grani, Aqua Caulis, and young Calum muscus. Auris also has great vision compared to other creatures in this cup, being able to see orange, yellow, green, and blue, allowing it to see members of its species against the vegetation much easier.
Next, a relative of Natantis being Arasi buka. Buka is an ambush predator. To sense anything around them, they have small holes for hearing nearby creatures. Buka will wait for anything small enough, something like Trandifer or even Natantis. It will jump out and bite onto the animal and drag its teeth across the animal until either the teeth get stuck on something or cut through the animal. Then Buka will wait until the animal bleeds out, and after the animal dies, Buka will slowly over days consume the body, and after it's done, it will wait for its next target.
Time for the furthest living relative of Trandifer being Suki Cibolus. Cibolus lives a very similar lifestyle to bees and butterflies, but we will get to that later. Cibolus is the smallest relative of Trandifer, and like muscus, uses a membrane inflated with helium and heated with a chemical reaction, allowing it to float. Cibolus also uses elongated arms with many plates to help move through the air. Cibolus uses, instead of using gray sensors like all other Trandifers, it uses hair-like organs to smell for food and sense minor vibrations in the air. The creature's head is also elongated and has a long tongue and beak to help with gathering food from Dolichos floris, a flowering plant that's height rivals even Microlignum, and other than its relation with Cibolus, is overall an unremarkable plant. Inside the flower, there are two organs holding sugary sap, and between those are hairs that when touched release spores, and Cibolus, after getting covered with these spores, will move to the next plant to deliver these spores. Next up, a much less complex plant, Bulbous folium. Bulbous folium is a simple ground plant with two large circular leaves and a soft yet sturdy stem. The plant will simply, after 2 months of growing, will release small puffs of spores on a weekly basis.
Another simple plant is duofoly. Foly is very similar to triplex coal and is the closest living relative of triplex. Other than the 3 different stems being much stronger and sturdier than triplexes, it's a rather simple plant.
Next, an especially interesting plant, Carnoradix. Radix is the only aquatic plant growing in the larger, more permanent lakes and ponds of soda. The plant stays afloat by filling its leaves with helium. This plant also spreads in a very interesting way. The adult plant will grow a smaller version of itself on the tip of a root. After the baby plant is fully developed, it will detach from the adult and flow away and grow into an adult of its own.
The last plant to talk about in the cup is Mortis anthrophagus. This plant makes up for the lack of fungus inside the cup by being a decomposer. The remaining leaves on top of the plant have very little photogears, making the plant awful at photosynthesis. Most of the plant's energy comes from decomposing matter. The fungi-like plants are connected via very small strands of root. These transfer nutrients to plants that have taken damage by plants or animals.
But now we have talked about all the plants inside the cup and time for many more animals. The first of the bunch being Natantus vermin. This parasite lives in the digestive system of Natantus and will consume a surprising amount of food Natantus eats. The parasite also causes Natantus' body temperature to increase between 35 and 50%. Thanks to the increased body temperature, less food going to Natantus, and the fact that Natantus is very bad at finding food, Natantus after some time will die of starvation, and so the parasite will lay its eggs in the corpse of Natantus. Then the hatchlings, after about 2 weeks, will start to eat the body of Natantus and hope for another Natantus to come along and slurp up the corpse along with the worm. The last relative of Trandifera is Acuta palmis. Acuta is the largest species of Trandifera and has one major adaptation that differs it from other species. On the end of its hands are sharp blade-like claws that Acuta uses mostly for self-defense. Other than that, it's just a larger, more aggressive Trandifera.
The next animal on the list is Duris adnomen. Duris is the only living relative of Pentanulida. Duris has a few key differences, though. First of all, the sensory arms have been improved and not only can smell corpses from a much further distance, and the ends are much sharper and can be used to defend corpses much better. Second of all, the large bulky arms that would release pods now only have one large hole that shoots out a larger singular pod. Other than those 2 differences, there's not a lot to say about Duris.
The second to last creature inside the cup is Magnus dens, a distant relative of Natantus. Magnus is an herbivore. The creature spends most of its time grousing on small plants like bulbous folium, aquacalis, etc. To grab these plants, it uses pedipalps similar to Trandiferas, but these arms can only catch small sound waves and cannot smell.
The final animal in the cup is a good one, being Dedeus monstrum. Monstrum has a very bizarre way of hunting. Monstrum will sit and wait in the grass until the proper prey is in sight, the prey being Precus pfister and Rubinus pfister and Gigans pfister. Amethysta pfister is too small for the way Monstrum hunts. You're about to see why. But after Monstrum sees any of the previously mentioned, it will roll into a ball and roll towards the pfister and bash into the animal's shell, absolutely destroying it and causing internal bleeding, and most likely kill the pfister in mere seconds. After Monstrum gets the kill, it will simply eat what it can and go back to the grass and wait.
So what, that's all? But there's still a lot to go. Well, here's why. See, when researching the cup, the scientists put the cup back where they found it to make sure not to cause any problems. But one day, an earthquake struck, and not only did the cup fall, but another cup fell with it and laid partially inside the other cup. And the scientists took a look inside this cup and found another ecosystem inside, but a problem. These 2 ecosystems mixed, causing all these previously separated species to collide and an extinction-level event occurred. But before we tell what happened with that story, let's see what the 80s cup we will call looked like before the disaster. We will start with the dominant ground vegetation being Brevis urbae. Brevis is a tiny plant, smaller than folium, and it's basically just grass but blue, although it has evolved tiny spines in the ends of their leaves to make them hard to eat. The next plant shall be Arium folium. Arium is a very similar plant to folium, but about 60% bigger overall. Arium is a simple 7 to 8 leaved plant that fights against Brevis over land. These 2 attempt to fill the same role in their ecosystem, which eventually would get one species killed. So in response, it seems that Arium is growing larger and turning into a larger, slower growing plant instead of becoming the dominant ground vegetation. Next up, Caerulus folium. Carew is a tree-like plant that has a similar orange color to the 60s cups plants, but this is simply a coincidence.
The plant at many points in its life will grow 2 small fruits that are packed full of vital nutrients and are seen as an absolute delicacy by herbivores. While just talking about carula, let's talk about Carulus folium immature. The first animal in the 80s cup is a neat one. The animal, as the name suggests, acts like a fruiting carew. It uses a bright orange sticky plate of chitin to lure in small prey. The immature's mouth is the same shade of blue as Carus's leaves and is lined with 12 giant teeth overall. But finally, after waiting a long time, the prey finally falls for the trap. It gets stuck on the fake fruit and gets pulled into Immature's gaping maw and will be digested, and later, if the animal has any bones or indigestible parts, Immature will vomit those parts out. Immature's body, however, compared to the fake fruit and mouth disguise, is very undisguised, made up of segmented chitin plates to protect the body. Immature is also immobile. Next animal is Admus pfister. Admus is the best example of convergent evolution, looking identical to Pecus pfister, but with a few differences. The fact that these two are so similar had a near impossible chance of happening. The only 2 known cups with these bizarre abilities have evolved for many years separate and somehow have an animal that looked the same. We will not get into the complex theories talking about how this happened, just know that maybe all of the members of Pfisteridae are stronger than we thought. Remember Immature? Good, so let's learn about Actus coda. This is the parasite of Immature. Coda uses its sharp, knife-like tail as a wedge and will pry itself under Immature's shell and stab into Immature and sap the blood out of Immature. But Coda doesn't actually stay for super long. Only about a week after Coda has filled with blood, it will simply walk around looking for a mate. After mating, it will go back to the same Immature for another week of drinking blood. Back to plants, let's talk about Maximus foli. Maximus is a strange plant with 2 stems and a connected root system and 1 giant leaf. But other than those facts, there's nothing else to really say about Maximus. Good name though. Next on the list is Multus folium, a simple small plant with up to 26 leaves on its head. The stem of Multus is an odd shade of green and covered in orange spots for a reason that we will get into later. The last plant of this bunch is Interfector caulis. Interfector is a tall-ish plant that has 2 separate root systems and 1 large leaf on top. The most interesting thing about Interfector is the large membrane that stretches across its stem. This membrane is sticky, and similar to sundew plants, it will use a sticky trap to catch prey. The prey in question is Penna armi, a tiny nocturnal animal that uses its feather-like arms to filter out dust and fly. Its second pair of arms, or pair of legs, depending on who you ask, has claw-like adaptations to hang from the bottom of Maximus's giant leaves during the day. The next animal is Minor cellula. This small cell-like animal eats fallen and dead plants, and out of both of the cups has the best vision, able to see just as many colors as you or me if you're not colorblind. It uses scythe-like arms for both self-defense and to cut up plants into edible parts. Next up is Velitas valga. Valga is an ambush predator, and unlike something like Dedeus monstrum, which waits in the shrubbery, Valga will wait in the soda and position itself so that its stinger can strike anything close enough. And when anything does come close enough, Valga will strike the animal and inject it with a paralyzing toxin. Valga's main prey item is, surprisingly enough, Admus pfister, being able to strike through Admus's armor. This is thanks to Admus's weaker shell than its possible Pecus or Gigans pfister relatives. Valga, with its 6 large crab-like legs, can also walk at a decent pace out of the water, able to avoid danger and trace prey to extent. Carulum arani. Despite its fearsome appearance, arani is a scavenger. Arani is quite large and intimidating, making smaller or younger predators leave it alone. Arani spends most of its time laying in the plants, just tall enough to hide it. With its pattern, it can be quite hard to spot. The next plant is Pendulus floris. This plant is quite unique thanks to the fact that it can only grow on cliff sides and other points where it can hang off the ground. The plant's stem is covered in giant thorns, and no animal can reasonably eat this plant, allowing the plant to almost free grow. It's unknown why this plant has the flower. There are no pollinators like Succisabolus, and it doesn't seem like Penna armi cares for flowers at all. We will get into the working theory for why this is on a future date. Next plant is Brevis podo, a short fruiting plant that consists only of a stem and occasionally a fruit with a similar consistency and feel of a potato. Podo is a staple on many herbivores' diets thanks to podo's fast regrowing fruit, which compared to other fruit and leaves is much more filling. Next plant is Basifer floris. This plant is similar to Carnoradix in its lifestyle. Basifer uses 4 large leaves to stay afloat. In the center of the plant, there is a multi-purpose lump. This 1 produces and accepts spores, and 2 produces a minor bad-smelling scent as a defense from being eaten. Bacifer also has 4 berries on thin stems. After the berries grow large enough, they will fall off due to the stems not being able to hold them up and float away. These berries will later, if the right conditions are met, will grow into the center body of a new bacifer and restart the cycle. Time for some more animals, starting with Multus valgus. Multus's job is to clean the many corpses inside the cup. Multus have no eyes, but on the ends of their many feet they have sensors that can sort of taste the ground and where they are going. It is not known how these work. Valgus, after finding a corpse, due to its awkwardly made body shape, has to lay on top of the corpse and slowly eat away at it. Although it's certainly a unique way of looking for food, it certainly works. A major problem for Valgus is being killed by Immature, thanks to the fact that Immature regurgitates the bones along with a little bit of meat after digesting prey. This often lures in a Valgus, which means one less Valgus. Even though Valgus is too big for Immature, Valgus can still get critically injured. Next up is the horrifying Grissa oculus. Grissa is by far the creepiest creature in either cup, and it has all the senses you and I have. It can hear, see, smell, feel, and taste. Luckily for this cup, the main prey item for Grissa is Valga. Grissa will wait and even swim through the water to find a Valga, then it will attempt to ambush Valga. Next is the simple Opacus. Opacus is a very simple animal that acts exactly like Radiolus, and the only one interesting thing to talk about is its reproduction. Opacus has 2 ways of reproducing. 1, it will simply divide into 2 smaller Opacuses, or 2, use spores. Opacus's only target plant is Carnus radicatus, another tree-like plant and a close relative to Multus folium. Carnus is also the reason for Multus folium's odd stem color. They both share the same odd green color, although Carnus might actually have a reason for this. The bright green stem puts a great contrast on Opacus for any carnivore that wants to pull off some free snacks. Next plant is Serenum pomi. Pomi is an unremarkable plant. Pomi grows bright yellow fruit. These fruit are filled with a thick sludge mix of seeds, fruit meat, and water. The next plant on the list is Spiritus educatoris. This is the resident decomposer, and it's very good at its job. Spiritus gets its name from the fact that when it's done with a body, it leaves behind a patch of ground that is about 4 times more fertile in nutrients for plants, causing a large group of plants to suddenly grow. The last plant to talk about in this cup is Ango radicatus. This plant grows in only the hottest parts of the cup. Ango above the ground is no more than a stump with 2 holes that release spores on a semi-yearly basis. But underground, Ango has a massive root system that spreads far from the plant. This is for any plant that grows near radicatus. There are no plants that can survive when growing close to Ango. Ango will wrap a root around the connection point between the stem and the roots, killing the plant. Ango will also drain the plant of nutrients, parasitizing anything. Ango is easily the most destructive plant in both cups. Time for the last 4 animals, starting with Calidae caput. The only organism to use helium to float, caput will float around until it floats above a target prey, then it will rapidly deflate and fall on top of the target, biting down onto it and stabbing it with its arms, not only causing many cuts and lacerations, but also crushing the animal with its body weight. Although this tactic of ambushing from the skies is an effective way of killing prey, it's also a good way of getting caput killed. If caput misses its target, or the target notices and runs away, the top of caput is soft and weak and easily damaged. So to help with this, caput has many eyes to improve depth perception, and caput makes little to no sound. Next up is Aqua Chimex. Chimex is a simple herbivore that grazes mostly on Bacifer's fallen berries. Chimex is a staple in many carnivore diets. Chimex can't defend itself with its small claws. The only defense it has is running back to the water. The second to last creature in the 80s cup is Titanus chimex. Titanus is the largest living known organism in both the 80s and 60s cups. Titanus lives outside of the water and eats large plants of the ecosystem. The front legs of Aqua Chimex have split uses. The back pair is now used to help support its weight, and the front two are used for grabbing plants and defending itself. Titanus grows a large pair of mandibles to help grind up plant matter. Last animal in the cup is Clarus chimex. Clarus is another herbivore eating the shorter to medium-sized plants in the ecosystem, and it is the fastest creature in the cup. It has grown an extra pair of front and back legs to help with speed. They have also evolved an organ to make a noise similar to rattlesnakes but at a deeper pitch. This sound is supposed to intimidate foes. To back up its intimidation, the teeth of Clarus are sharp, mostly to cut up plants but can cause bleeding. Now time to talk about what went extinct during the connection, which is what we will refer to the cups coming together. During the connection, a large portion of sugar, lakes, dust, and plants and animals were launched from the 80s cup into the 60s cup, but luckily for the 80s cup, no 60s plants or animals were able to get into the 80s cup. But in the 60s cup, the two now fight over the land. The specifics of what happened are largely unknown, but what is known is what plants and animals did not go extinct and which ones did. Inside the 60s cup, 11 animals and 3 plants went extinct, these being Natantus being outcompeted by a mix of Spiritus educatorus and Multus valgus. Praestrictus was killed by many of the 80s cup predators. Pecus Pfister was extinct due to Admus Pfister. Arcus cellula was killed due to a mix of Admus Pfister and 80s cup predators. Dedeus monstrum was killed due to a lack of an abundant prey. Hyalus oculi was killed due to unknown reasons. Amethysta Pfister was killed due to Admus Pfister. Longa auris was killed due to Titanus and Clarus chymex. Durus ad nomen was killed due to 80s predators. Gigans Pfister was killed due to Admus Pfister. Natantus vermin was killed due to the extinction of Natantus. All other 60s cups animals survived. The plants that went extinct were Segmid caul due to the competition with Ango radicatus. Mortus anthrophagus was killed due to Spiritus educatorus. Aesoni mortua was killed partially due to Maximus folii. All other plants survived the extinction event. Time for extinctions of the 80s animals. Opacus was killed due to Rara radiolus stella and 60s predators. Aqua chymex was killed due to 60s cup predators and Trandifer. Multus valgus went extinct due to all of the 60s cup's organisms. Validus valga was killed due to geological changes. All other 80s animals survived. Multus folium was killed by 60s cup's small plants. Basifer floris was killed due to Carnoradix. Arium folium was killed due to folium. All other plants survived. These two live in somewhat harmony, although looking odd with the bright orange against the dark blue, and although the extinction level event is over, there's still lots to talk about, like undiscovered species, evolutionary wars. Before we go, I want to make something clear. These evolutionary lines of plants and animals that we did and didn't show are most likely wrong and will be updated accordingly, but for now, that was the speculative biology inside a McDonald's cup.